You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 31st of January 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist. I'm Guy Delaunay. Coming up, Syria has a new president and reparations from Russia are on his mind.
Syria's needs are greater than ever. Just as we were determined previously to liberate it, we must be determined to build and develop it.
Meanwhile, in Myanmar, elections are on the agenda, but the question is when. We'll discuss the possibilities with academic and author Ronan Lee. Now, one of the world's more left-field film festivals is bringing the stars to Utah, but is Sundance set for a move to Cincinnati? Whatever the location, we'll have more on the films to see with Karen Krzanovich. And it's Friday, so that means we'll be finding out what Andrew Mueller learned this week.
We learned, possibly for the very first time in the history of Anglo-French relations, that the United Kingdom was prepared to make even the vaguest effort to avoid upsetting its neighbours.
Crikey. We'll also be getting musical with Will Hodgkinson, rifling through the morning's front pages with Claudine Fry, and getting the news from Norway with Lars Bavanger. All ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Officials in Washington, D.C. have said there are no survivors of yesterday's mid-air collision between an American Airlines plane and a military helicopter. 28 bodies have so far been recovered. There were 60 passengers and 4 crew on the plane. 3 soldiers were on the helicopter. Staying in the US, a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican goods crossing into the country will begin on the 1st of February. President Trump hasn't clarified if the import taxes will apply to oil from the two countries. He reckons the tariffs, plus suggested levies on China, are efforts to stop fentanyl imports into the US. A total of 110 Palestinian prisoners have been released from Israeli prisons. It follows a delay for safety reasons following chaotic scenes during a hostage release in Khan Yunis. 5 Thai agricultural workers from farms near Gaza who were taken hostage in October 2023 were freed on Thursday. 1 Thai hostage remains unaccounted for. And you can stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. But first, is the situation in Syria solidifying? The country now has a new president, former rebel leader Ahmed al-Sharaa. He's been the de facto leader for the best part of 2 months, and that position's now been formalised for a so-called transitional period. High on the agenda for the new head of state are relations with Russia. There have been talks with officials from Moscow on, and I quote, reparations, reconstruction and recovery. At least that's how the Syrian side sees it. Well, Monocle's regular Middle East expert Ruth Michelson will have a view on all of this and everything else going on in Syria. And Ruth joins us now from Istanbul. Good morning, Ruth, and welcome back to The Globalist. Just refreshers for those of us who aren't paying the closest attention to what's going on in Syria. Ahmed al-Sharaa, how has he arrived at this post of transitional president?
Well, I mean, he has been the head of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a militia that surprised everyone, I think, including themselves, by spearheading an offensive against Bashar al-Assad, the former Syrian dictator, that rather suddenly removed Assad from power in early December. And I think, when we look at the events of this week and Sharaa kind of declaring himself to be the interim president, there's been some commentators pointing out it's been 54 days since Assad fled to Moscow. And in that time, this is the first time last night that Sharaa spoke to the Syrian people. Not a very long speech. He did say at one point, I speak to you today not as a ruler, but as a servant of our wounded homeland. But the fact is, he was speaking as a ruler. He had been declared to be the interim president in a closed-door meeting with members of HTS the night before, where there had been certainly some heavy suggestion that would be broadcast to the public. It wasn't. And so then he was just suddenly declared to be the interim president. And then after meeting with the Emir of Qatar, who was visiting yesterday, gets on TV and addresses the Syrian public. And I think that it's quite understandable that there are a lot of concerned and confused members of the Syrian public that are worried that this is all laying the groundwork for a power grab that could go on for an indefinite period of time. Sharaa has talked about having elections maybe in 4 years. This need to, he's dissolved the constitution. And so there's just this feeling that this is, transition of any kind is shaky. But this is looking a little extra shaky given what we've seen so far this week and the sequence of events of how it's been unveiled.
Well, indeed, I was going to ask, how he's been acclaimed by the Syrian public. As if you're having these behind closed doors sorts of meetings and talks of transitional presidencies, none of this ever feels good unless there's a very clear roadmap for what's going on. And I take it we don't have that.
He has spoken about a transitional phase that will last until March, but that there is this broader transition, a need to rewrite the constitution, and a journey to elections that could take years.
Oh,
that is, yes, in some way, it's hard to imagine that Syria would be able to have elections today. HTS still don't have full control over the entire country. But at the same time, just to give one example, when I was speaking to people in Sueda, which is an overwhelmingly Druze province south of Damascus, every single person I spoke with during the time that I spent there, the first thing they said was, well, we want to be part of this new Syria, but let's not forget, we don't call this the new government. This government doesn't have a mandate from the Syrian people. This is a caretaker government, a transitional government. We want to be part of Syria's future, but we won't think about the path to doing that if this is a government that just declares themselves in power and it's fait accompli.
So if I'm looking right now at a photograph of Ahmed al-Sharaa on the runway with the Emir of Qatar on the red carpet, at the start, presumably, of this visit that we were just talking about, Ruth. He's clearly here trying to present himself as a legitimate statesman, isn't he? This is not just I'm a transitional leader. This is I'm the man and look who's come to visit.
Well, that has in some ways been the case for a while. He's been taking meetings at the presidential palace for some time. He was interviewed by the BBC in the presidential palace. That was one of the first indicators that we had that that's how he was going to be using the building. So the idea that he's been the de facto leader seems to have sit generally okay with people. When I spoke to people there, that al-Sharaa seemed to be in charge. I think the issue starts to be when there's a real lack of clarity about what happens next. Lots of talk of this national conference where, everybody will be represented, but very few concrete plans and suggestions about how things are going to move forward, and most importantly, how HTS and Sharaa in particular are going to listen or incorporate views from people who are very different from them, of which there are many, and there are many Syrians who are ready to go right now, ready to start building things in Syria, ready to contribute, highly trained people that have come back from overseas wanting to rebuild their country. And I think the question is whether he and whether this new caretaker administration will listen to them.
Well, it does seem that the Emir of Qatar, despite this visit, this red carpet visit and everything that accompanies that, he understands that as well, because the quote that's coming out from the Qatari royal court is that the Emir has pushed forward the urgent need to form a government that represents all segments of the Syrian people. But what else was the Emir of Qatar actually trying to achieve there?
Yes, I mean, it's, I think when thinking about these visits by, from the Qataris, I mean, Qatar is getting what they want in terms of a cooperative partner government in Damascus for the first time in many years. And Qatar hasn't been shy to show their newfound connection to Damascus. I was there when the first direct flight from Doha in 13 years landed in Damascus. And that was, something joyful for a lot of those people there, able to reunite with their families for the first time in ages. But in terms of there's a lot that Damascus wants from Qatar as well, particularly in terms of things like electricity supplies, energy. And so, it feels unlikely that the Emir of Qatar would say, essentially he's emphasizing that there is this urgent need to form a government that represents everyone, But at the same time, Qatar is not the kind of nation that if Damascus fails to do that they will say, we're not going to supply you with energy if you don't do it. They're not going to make these conditional promises. This is something, it's a very different meeting to the kind of the meeting that we saw that you mentioned with Russia, for example, earlier this week.
And I'd just like to wrap things up with that Russian meeting, Ruth. I'm sorry, I've nattered on so much about other things that I haven't got the time to go into this in too much depth. But are we close to getting things sorted out with Russia's presence in Syria, both the unwinding of it and its ongoing presence?
Well, I mean, I think the Russians would hope that we are, but the suggestion is a little more unclear. I mean, certainly there's assumption of a quid pro quo has been happening in that meeting, that there was something more transactional in place. Russia wanted assurances that it could keep its military bases. The Russian Foreign Ministry describing a candid exchange on the comprehensive spectrum of Russian-Syrian relations. And what we've seen reported from the meeting is that al-Sharaa demanded that Moscow hand over the former Syrian president Bashar al-Assad. And then, as you mentioned, rebuilding trust through compensation, reconstruction and recovery. So whether that quid pro quo has really been worked out after that meeting, we're not seeing signs of it just yet.
Ruth, thanks as ever for joining us on The Globalist. That's Ruth Michelson reporting. Now, it's 13:32 in Napier Door and 7:12 in the morning here in London. That's a bit of mental maths for you at this time in the morning. Myanmar is all set for elections this year, although when I say all set, I actually mean not particularly set up at all, because the military junta which controls the country hasn't named the date, and tomorrow marks the 4-year anniversary of its coup, which overthrew Aung San Suu Kyi's government and sparked the ongoing civil war. The situation's complicated by the imminent expiry of the country's state of emergency and opposition to holding elections from the deposed Prime Minister's party. So let's see if we can simplify matters with Dr. Ronan Lee, who's an academic and the author of Myanmar's Rohingya Genocide, Identity, History and Hate Speech. Ronan, I mean, it's worth saying, I mean, elections in Myanmar, bearing in mind the ongoing crisis there, seem a bit of a reach at the moment, don't they?
Well, they won't happen, and they certainly won't happen in any way that the people of Myanmar support. So the military believes that elections will be a means of hanging on to power, of gaining some legitimacy internationally. And bizarrely, they seem to believe that this is a way of gaining some legitimacy for their rule within Myanmar. The people of Myanmar are wholly opposed to this. I mean, the military attempted to undertake a census of the country prior to the election. They've done that in recent times. 50% of the country, they were even unable to gather statistics. So that gives you some indication of the state of play on the ground in Myanmar. The alternate government, the National Unity Government, says that it will oppose the elections. So it says the elections, which would be a poll undertaken where only military-approved parties could participate. That the NUG says that this would be illegitimate, and they will oppose it. So some analysts are suggesting this could lead to a bloodbath around polling stations. I mean, this is This is a ludicrous proposal by the Myanmar military. They're desperate. I mean, if we were talking 12 months ago, we would have been talking about the third anniversary of the coup, and we'd be saying, I'd be telling you that opposition groups were now starting to demonstrate that they could achieve battlefield success against Myanmar's military. 12 months on, opposition groups are controlling 40% of the country. And the military's control, if we could use those sorts of terms, is down to basically just the urban centres. For the first time in 80 years, Myanmar's military's lost control of military commands in the northeast of the country and in the west of the country. I mean, this is an existential threat to the rule of the Myanmar military. All the trends are going against them, and the people of Myanmar want them out of power. The problem on the ground in Myanmar is that the country's devastated. I mean, what people are facing there is civil war, bloodshed, and misery. There are, according to the UN, about 3.3 million people displaced within the country. Half the country are living in poverty. I mean, this is a country of 50 million people, and approaching 10% of the country are displaced. This is chaos, and if the international community wants to help the people of Myanmar, the best thing to do is to escalate the removal of an unpopular military junta from power.
So the military's next move is what we're looking for at the moment. I mean, the current state of emergency, which is in place, expires today. One presumes if they're not going to announce elections, they announce an extension of the state of emergency. And if so, what does that mean? Does it mean we're going to get any closer to any sort of solution for all of these millions of people who've been suffering in these past 4 years?
Well, nothing will change with a new state of emergency. The Myanmar military has been putting these in place since virtually from the day it launched the coup. So there'll be no change tomorrow in a practical sense. But what has changed is the morale of the opposition. So you've got ordinary people from the Buddhist majority of the country who've now taken up arms, really in many respects for the first time. But they have aligned with armed groups from ethnic and religious minorities who have been fighting the Myanmar military more or less since independence in the 1940s. So you've got now a popular uprising, the Spring Revolution they call it. It's a popular uprising against military rule. The people want the military out of power, but the military still have weapons. And the military's response when they lose territory is to use their air superiority. I mean, that's the one place where they clearly have a strong strategic advantage. And they take a scorched earth approach. So when opposition groups take control of villages and towns, the Myanmar military launches airstrikes on them, and it is quite literally scorched earth. I mean, their approach is to destroy any opportunity for the opposition to gain access. I mean, they call them clearance operations. It's about removing access to food, funds, recruits, or intelligence. This is a battle. These are battles that are waging across the country, from the frontier with China in the north all the way to the Bay of Bengal. And the impact on just ordinary people in Myanmar is just utterly devastating.
We've seen in the past with Myanmar's military that they're as much of a business operation as they are a military operation. So what's it going to take to get them to step aside? Because, clearly if you've got an ongoing civil war, this is no good for anybody.
I think it'll take the involvement of major international powers. I mean, China's the supporter of the Myanmar military. China has, when the coup was launched, China had an ambivalent attitude. They were not over the moon that the coup was launched. They had a very good relationship with the previous government of Aung San Suu Kyi. But since that time, China has doubled down and supported. China's view on Myanmar is that what it wants is some degree of stability so that Myanmar can be a client state of China on the Chinese periphery. That's what China wants to see. China doesn't necessarily want to see these issues resolved, but it wants some degree of stability. The problem is it's not achieving that. It's not achieving any degree of stability within Myanmar. And the indications are that the Myanmar military will simply fight till the last man. I mean, the state of play on the ground is that the Myanmar military is no longer paying death benefits to soldiers who are killed in action. They often say that the soldier is missing or can't be accounted for. They've now announced that they will likely be conscripting young women into the military, and this is causing some considerable anxiety within Myanmar. But the indication is strongly that the Myanmar military will just fight to the last man. They will fight until they can't fight anymore, because they've been given no off-ramp, they've been given no options, and the government that can give them some options are those that are those that are supplying their weapons, and that's really China.
Ronan, thank you very much for joining us on The Globalist this morning. That's Ronan Lee, the academic and author. Still to come in the programme, we'll be getting musical.
And the Grammy goes to...
This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Now, let's continue with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Claudine Fry, a partner at Control Risks. Welcome back to The Globalist, Claudine. I can see you've got your stories ready to roll there. And I believe we are kicking off with South Africa and Rwanda.
That's right. Good morning. Nice to be with you. Thank you for having me. Yes, piece from the Financial Times reporting on the situation in eastern DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, a vast country in Central Africa, where unfortunately there has been an escalation of violence in the Far East over the past few days. And this piece is reporting on a pretty robust exchange of words between the governments of Rwanda and South Africa. Rwanda is linked to a militia group which has expanded its position in the east and, in fact, taken control of a provincial capital, Goma, in a mineral-rich area of DRC. And South Africa has had peacekeeping troops there for some time, 13 of whom have actually been killed in the violence over the past few days. South Africa has expressed anger over the death of its nationals and warned that if there is any further direct fire targeted at its troops, it will perceive that as a declaration of war.
Yeah, this is it. This is the quote from the Defence Minister. If you're going to fire, we'll take it as a declaration of war, and we have to defend our people. This is South Africa getting dragged into an actual conflict with another country. I can't recall seeing this in my memory.
Yeah, it's really at a very, very delicate stage, the situation now. Rwanda has responded in also very, very firm terms. The leader of Rwanda said yesterday, if South Africa prefers confrontation, Rwanda will deal with the matter in that context any day. It's really a very worrying situation indeed. The last time DRC was roughly where we are now in terms of this particular rebel group, the M23 having expanded in the east in 2012. The geopolitical environment was very different, and pressure, particularly from the US, was put on Rwanda to actually influence the withdrawal of this M23 militia group. But now the geopolitical environment is so different. There is a huge amount of nervousness because the danger of escalation is perceived to be so much higher.
Well, we're going to stick with the FT, but move all the way back here to the UK, Claudine, because the headline in the UK manufacturing section of the FT is car production at UK plants falls below 1 million vehicles. When was it? I'm trying to see if they say when the last time was that vehicle production was that sort of level in the UK.
Yes, it's really a sad tale for the UK, where growth is stalling, where productivity is extremely low, and the government seems to be struggling to convince us all that it's going to be able to turn those things around. So yes, vehicle manufacturing in the UK fell by almost 12% 20% last year. It was a peak. There was a peak of production just before COVID. And as with many areas of the UK economy that's really been struggling to restore activity to levels which we were familiar with before 2020. But the piece notes that this drop in production is actually linked to a number of factors. It's not just about competitiveness from other countries and poor productivity. It's also about the fact that many manufacturers in the UK are actually ceasing production of models in order to pause and then sort of refresh their manufacturing supply chains in order to be focusing on the EV vehicles, which they are under a huge amount of pressure to be prioritising for the local market here now.
We haven't mentioned the elephant in the room, Claudine, which is Britain no longer being a member of the European Union. That can't possibly help. I mean, the question is, of course, at any point is the UK government going to address this? Because, while one can have different views on car manufacturing and its how crucial it is to the UK's economy, there's certainly no denying that it grabs headlines when we get events like this, falling below 1 million vehicles of production. The car industry is seen as prestigious to the country. Are we getting anything back from the government on this?
That's right. The piece notes that exports of cars to the EU fell 24.3% last year, and many EU countries are absolutely critical trading partners to the UK. Yes, you're right. Starmer is under a huge amount of pressure to live up to what he has said he would like to do, which is a very carefully calibrated position around restoring the UK relationship with Europe in a politically acceptable way. But actually, it seems like it's actually not going to be as easy as perhaps the Labour Party had hoped. And there is some resistance within parts of the EU to accepting closer relations with the UK. Just yet, there are a number of different sources of tension on both sides, for example, around the movement of young people again. So, yes, it's going to be really difficult to see how the UK navigates that path, although perhaps because of shared security and strategic interests and shared interests in standing up to Trump, perhaps we might see the UK managing to get closer to Europe again.
I'm going to, at this point, just do a completely gratuitous plug for a book I just read, which was Carmageddon by Daniel Knowles, who's the Midwest correspondent of The Economist, which is actually a fascinating look at things such as car manufacturing, but also the car's place in our societies. You won't be surprised to hear. But it makes you think about these sort of things in a slightly different way, which probably won't help the government at all at this moment. But let's move to Stockholm. Claudine, because you've highlighted a piece in the New York Times with a rather grim and self-explanatory headline: "Man who burned Quran in Stockholm is killed."
Yes, this story is reported in a number of different papers. Sweden, where there has been growing social tension linked to immigration and where the authorities have really struggled with how to manage Quran burning and the impact of that on Sweden's standing around the world over the past few years. It's now dealing with the aftermath of the assassination by shooting of an Iraqi immigrant who is well known because he staged a number of very controversial protests, including in 2023, burning a Quran, which triggered outrage protests in a number of different countries with largely Islamic populations, and was even linked to hostility towards Sweden, which led to its accession into NATO being delayed. So this individual had achieved notoriety. And he's not alone. There are others with him who pursue a similar cause, and so it's not an issue that's going to go away. One of his associates, who was also due to be sentenced with him today in connection with charges related to Quran burning, has rather chillingly posted on social media yesterday that he thinks he will be next.
Grim story indeed. So let's end with a little bit of hope, which is a study of tigers It is funny. I was just talking about tigers in Bangladesh with my sister yesterday. Well, this is in the same sort of region in India. The tiger population appears to have doubled in a decade.
Yes, that's right. I thought, gosh, let's try and find us an uplifting story. So in The Independent, it's reporting on a study in the journal Science, which suggests that India, a conservation project in India, has indeed managed to increase and in fact double its tiger population in a little over a decade. It says it's done that by protecting big cats from poaching and habitat loss, ensuring they have enough prey, reducing human-wildlife conflict and increasing communities' living standards. And that seems to be a key point that the survey wants to project, that you can achieve successes with respect to biodiversity and protecting animal populations without necessarily harming the opportunities of affected communities to make a living. Apparently, some of the communities nearby where some of this work has been taking place have even managed to improve their livelihoods by benefiting from ecotourism.
Yeah, it takes me back to my years living in Cambodia, Claudine, where the elephants were in conflict with the humans until they learned two things. One, that if you plant chili around your crops, the elephants don't come in. And secondly, the elephants will bring the tourists. But on that bombshell, we're going to wrap up the newspaper review. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Claudine. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Officials in Washington, D.C. have said there are no survivors of yesterday's mid-air collision between an American Airlines plane and a military helicopter. 28 bodies have so far been recovered. There were 60 passengers and 4 crew on the plane and 3 soldiers on board the Black Hawk helicopter. Staying in the US, a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican goods crossing into the country will begin on the 1st of February. President Trump hasn't yet clarified if the import taxes will apply to oil from the two countries. Mr. Trump claims the tariffs, plus suggested levies on China, are efforts to stop fentanyl imports into the US. A total of 110 Palestinian prisoners have been released from Israeli prisons. It follows a delay for safety reasons following chaotic scenes during a hostage release in Khan Yunis. 5 Thai agricultural workers employed in farms near Gaza, who were taken hostage by Hamas on October the 7th, 2023, were freed on Thursday. 1 Thai hostage remains unaccounted for. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. And it's 7:31 in the morning here in London, and it's the time of year when Utah becomes world-renowned for something other than its most prevalent religious denomination. The Sundance Film Festival is in full swing until, I think, the end of the weekend, and as usual, it's been a mix of A-list stars and plucky outsiders. Monocle's favourite film critic, Karen Krzanovich, has been following them all for us. Welcome back to The Globalist, Karen.
It's nice to be here.
It's delightful to have you. And first of all, I trailed this at the top of the programme.
Yes.
When I'm looking at what's going on at Sundance, I see the word Cincinnati coming up.
Yeah,
and,
I saw the word Boulder. But anyway, go on.
Well, apparently there are 3... Sundance has got to move. It's become too successful for its own good. And, it's looking at new locations, one of which is within Utah, Salt Lake City. Then you've got Boulder, which you mentioned, in Colorado, another ski resort. But Cincinnati, Ohio also fancies it.
Why not? It's a cultural hub. Actually, people overlook Ohio because, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and everything. So, it's kind of, it's right in the middle. It's easy to get to. Pretty, lots of trees. We know that Sundance started out as this this beautiful ski resort, and it's accessible. Unlike Telluride, Telluride's actually extremely difficult to get into. It's very expensive. But I think that all of these mooted moves, Cincinnati or Boulder or even staying in Utah, which I think would be a great move, is essential because the festival brings in 500,000 people.
Yeah.
And that's just too much for it just can't cope. And I think it just shuts down the rest of the town. So although it's sad because we like the idea of snow and Robert Redford with his aviators when he first started this, I think it's a good move, and I think it will help Sundance to continue to do what it started out to do, and that's bring American independent films.
And so it's still doing that because, when I look at all of these A-listers, I mean, for those of us who remember the start of Sundance, it very much was the plucky outsiders.
Well, but that's exactly what it was designed to do. But since then, it's morphed. It's still a little bit more this year, trying to get back to it. But because South by Southwest and other festivals have sort of grabbed that away, Sundance has had to morph into something slightly sort of elevated independent, I suppose. So one that's sort of associated with studios. And you have to remember that independent filmmaking is extremely difficult. Not only is it very hard to get funding, but it's also very hard to get distribution. So...
We should talk about the films themselves. I mean, I could talk about this whole concept of Sundance as much as you like. I mean, we can come back to it even. But you know what? It strikes me there's a bit of a musical theme to this year's Sundance, at least in terms of the films that are making the headlines.
Yes.
Now, we may circle back to John Malkovich Vehicle Opus, which has got a Nile Rodgers soundtrack and some not brilliant reviews, it has to be said.
Nile Rodgers, though.
Yeah, well, indeed. Nile Rodgers and John Malkovich, but that's got to be some sort of marriage made in heaven.
Good.
Yeah, so, but we've got J-Lo in the musical version of Kiss of the Spider Woman, which I think was a film which was around before Sundance was around.
It was a book, then a film, then book, then theater,
I remember
then
the
film.
William Hurt
Of course.
version.
Have you ever tried to I tried to watch it recently. Hello.
Oh, right. There haven't, maybe stay away? Or?
I would stay away. It has not aged gracefully. No.
Dear me. But to start with, before we even go into this Kiss of the Spider-Woman musical remake, I want to talk about Sly Lives.
Yeah.
Because Sly and the Family Stone, absolutely. If you're putting a gun to my head, say what was your favourite band of all time, they might be the words that come out of my mouth.
Yeah,
so
right up there next to Parliament for me, but never mind. Yeah, I mean, Questlove, who did the award-winning Summer of Love, has come back with Sly Lives, or also known as The Burden of Black Genius. And this is finally a look at Sly Stone. I know people keep on saying Sylvester Stallone. No, it's not. It's a different guy. So this is 4 years after his Sundance sale for his previous documentary. This is about Sly and the Family Stone leader, Sly Stone. And it's a look at how groundbreaking he was, how amazing he was, what he did. I mean, obviously I can't go into the entire film, but also the problems that he had afterwards. He's still alive.
Yeah. So
they're now calling him just sort of he's just a proper old man now, they say. But it's hard to picture. I
mean, I've read the alleged autobiography, which was set up by Questlove's ghostwriter. So that was
What'd you think?
It was interesting-ish, but it's not really delving as deep as one would like, perhaps. I mean, the thing which I'd like to know is Questlove going to be using more of the absolutely incendiary live footage which we saw in Summer of Soul of Sly and the Family Stone? Because I've got to say, that sequence from the Harlem Cultural Festival, when Sly and the Family Stone take the stage, the hairs on the backs of my arms all just went up.
You're mentioning it, I'm getting goosebumps.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's incredible.
How 50 years on and still incredible.
Well, I mean, he uses what he can. I mean, it's a beautifully made film, and I'm very excited to see it because it's one of these things. Like, I'm waiting for the Captain Beefheart one too, but I don't think Questlove's going to do that one. I think it's great to look back at these amazing pivotal performers, and this is a gateway in for people that don't know his music. So don't worry, there's plenty of excitement here. Maybe not as much as what you're looking for. There's
right.
Plenty.
Then not as much.
But you're going to see it anyway.
I am going to see it anyway.
I mean, you've seen A Complete Unknown, right?
I've not seen A Complete Unknown.
Well, this is.
I'm not so much of a Dylan fan. I mean,
doesn't matter. You've got to see it.
Jam.
You've got to be part of the conversation.
Righty-ho. I do have a Questlove story. Can I do it briefly?
Yes.
Yes, I can do it briefly. We had the Roots in for a session when I was working at BBC Six Music. I was instrumental in making that happen. And at one point, I'm meant to be doing an interview with Questlove. And at one point, he pops into the control room when they're just getting their sound sorted out. And he says to this very old-school BBC sound engineer, "Listen, man, what you got to understand is we're a hip-hop band. And right now, you got us sounding like light jazz."
Ooh,
and
what happened?
The sound engineer was very unhappy about it. But he'd sort of grumbled and adjusted things so they went a bit more into the red, which is what Questlove wanted.
But he just wanted a little bit more belly, a little more bass, and a little more
dirt.
A
little more dirt.
Well, but, I'm sure he understood that.
Let's talk J-Lo, though.
We could.
More musical. Well, Kiss of the Spider-Woman musical, is it worth it?
It's one of those things where it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm going to see it anyway. It's one of those we see one of these things. I'm fascinated by this film because I'm fascinated by the nature of it. I mean, we've got to look at it in the light of Emilia Perez, 13 Oscar nominations, and Bill Condon, who did Gods and Monsters. So I think back in the 90s, I should look that up. Taking on this crazy story of an Argentinian prison and the fantasies of one of the inmates, and sort of it was a big deal when it came out. And I think what's great about this is that Jennifer Lopez is beautifully cast as the fantasy, sexy siren Spider Woman, who's also very dangerous. And she came to Sundance wearing a spider web dress, and that's not really what you do at Sundance, but nobody cares because it's J-Lo. So, along with her not doing stairs, she can do what she likes. And I think that this is just another. Actually, what I think this heralds is that we're beginning to feel more freedom around the genre of musicals. We used to, we used to feel that way about Westerns, like Westerns are dead. Well, no, they're not. They're back. Or maybe they're in outer space. But now I think, along with Wicked and Emilia Perez and Kiss the Spider-Woman, I think we're going to see a lot more musicals that are going to feel less like musicals but still be musicals, if that makes any sense.
No, I've nattered so much, Karen. I haven't got time to go through the rest of the films you've highlighted, but I'm going to highlight them very quickly.
Okay.
You reckon to watch, we've got Twinless.
Twinless, yes.
Peter Hujar's Day.
Yes, a fantastic Ira Sachs movie, and it's only 76 minutes, so you can't say no.
Now, that's good, isn't it?
Ben Whishaw, great performance.
And then finally, is Train Dreams as good as Robot Dreams?
No. It's different. It's got real people in it. This is the only film so far of which I'm aware that sold at Sundance this year. And Netflix snapped it up, and it stars Joel Edgerton and Felicity Jones.
And Pocket Plot.
Pocket Plot. It's the story of a day laborer in the American West at the beginning of the 20th century.
We'll watch out for that one. Thanks very much for joining us, Karen. Karen Krzanovich, Monocle's favourite film critic. You're listening to Monocle Radio. It's 8:41 in Zurich, and it's also 8:41 in Oslo. And that's where we're heading now for some news from Norway with Lars Bavanger, Monaco's Oslo correspondent. Welcome back to The Globalist, Lars. Now, let's have a look, first of all, at Norway's government collapsing over an EU energy rules row.
Yes, I guess you could call it a collapse. It's one of the two government parties. The Centre Party has withdrawn. The ruling Labour Party will stay on as a minority one-party government, so there's no literal collapse. But what happened is that the Centre Party has been always very anti-EU. Now, Norway is not a fully fledged EU member, but it's member of the European Economic Area, which means it has to adopt EU directives if it wants to stay in the EU's good books. Now, the row has been over EU directives on energy and to get Norway closer to the European energy market. And the Centre Party has argued that this is the cause of increased energy prices in Norway, and they're hoping that they could win some votes in the new election that comes up in September by sticking to their guns. But the Prime Minister from Labour didn't want to listen to them, and the Centre Party decided that they had to withdraw.
I love the fact that there is a centre party. Do you have a left and a right?
Yes, I mean, people joke that all parties in Norway are social democratic parties, just slightly to the left or slightly to the right. But there's a lot of political parties, so government coalitions are the norm rather than the exception. This is the first time there's a one-party minority government for more than 20 years, I think, now that we've only got a Labour in power up until the election in September. Just in comparison, we have got a party in Slovenia which is called the Left. So maybe we should get the left and the centre together and see if they can find a right. But that would be a challenge for another day, perhaps. Let's look at Norway's wealth fund. And this is, the famous sovereign wealth fund, isn't it? Record profits. Now worth how much per citizen? Per citizen, it's worth $360,000. That's each woman, child and man in Norway, which sounds amazing. But of course, people don't see that in their bank accounts. The fund is now worth a staggering $1.8 trillion, and the record profits that came out yesterday were $222 billion. That's a record in terms of money. The percentage rise is not a record, but it's never before had so much in monetary terms as reported profits. Now, the main investments are in tech firms. So Apple tops the investment list, and the head of the fund has warned that, as we've seen with the emergence of DeepSeek from China, the tech market is volatile, and he's warned that the fund might have to divest a little bit away from the tech sector and not put all their eggs in one basket to maintain this growth into the future. But it's growing very quickly. I mean, the oil fund has doubled in value since 2019 nearly. So it looks like the only way is up.
It's incredible. A profit of $222 billion for the year. Is this being put to good use in Norway, Lars, or are they just rolling it over?
Well, they're rolling most of it over because they've got a fiscal rule which says any government should avoid spending more than around 4% of the profits from the oil fund each year, because if you go beyond that, you do risk hyperinflation. Of course, we've seen this in failed petroleum states like Venezuela, where they just basically splashed all the oil wealth on public spending with pretty dire results. So the oil fund, the idea behind the oil fund is not to spend all the money, but invest it and save it for a rainy day, for when oil and gas from the North Sea no longer it'll run out, but also it will be worth much less, obviously, with the green transition that we are going into.
Many thanks for joining us, Lars. That's Lars Bavanger from Oslo. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's time now to talk music with Will Hodgkinson, the author and journalist who joins us now from London. Will, welcome to The Globalist. I think we need to start just first of all with talking music to pay tribute to Marianne Faithfull, who's just died at the age of 78.
Yes, I think that's a very good idea. Marianne Faithfull was amazing, really, because, she started off in 1964 after being discovered by Andrew Loog Oldham, the Stones manager. And she did As Tears Go By, which is, of course, a Stones song. And then she got pulled into the Stones orbit, and she's so famous for really being destroyed by it. There was the drugs bust at Keith Richards' house. There was, she ended up in addiction herself. But then in 1979, such a remarkable return with Broken English, one of the most beautiful albums. And it was really about everything she'd been through. So that's just two moments which I think about, which, sort of going from this, I guess, icon, 60s icon, to a real, superb artist in her own right.
I had a personal Marianne Faithfull moment about 20 years ago at an Evan Dando gig at UCL in London, when Evan Dando suddenly announces, and now I'd like to welcome to the stage Marianne Faithfull, and the woman standing next to me just walks up the stairs and onto the stage. And I hadn't realised, hadn't twigged it was her, but that just showed how relevant she remained to generations of musicians.
Well, that's the interesting thing. I mean, I think when she made Broken English, at that point, she'd been really cast aside by the Stones. And, by 1979, they were one of the biggest stadium bands in the world, but they'd really been dated by punk. And she came along and made this album that was so relevant. And then she continued being so. She was Jarvis Cocker and Nick Cave and all these different people paid homage to her by writing songs, which she interpreted in very much her own way. So, yes, I think she definitely stayed relevant.
And it was, I just begin to move on to other things, but it was interesting to note in the tribute to her in The Guardian, they mentioned her coming back when Blondie were number one and Ian Dury was top of the charts. And, of course, both those artists, Debbie Harry and Ian Dury, were actually older than Marianne Faithfull at the time. But let us move on to the Grammys, because we're getting into the Grammy prediction season, Will. Who should we be looking out for?
Well, I think we should definitely be looking out for Chapel Roan, who nobody had heard of this time last year, but we did an amazing album with the rise and fall of a Midwest princess and fantastic song, Good Luck Babe. I think she'll definitely win Best New Artist. I wouldn't be surprised if she wins Song of the Year. I think Kendrick Lamar, with his diss track on Drake, Not Like Us, is going to be featured quite heavily. And I think Sabrina Carpenter will be featured heavily. Record of the Year, hard to call. I think it might be Birds of a Feather by, oh my God, my mind's gone completely blank, Billie Eilish. Song of the Year, I think it might be Please, Please, Please by Sabrina Carpenter. Best New Artist, Chapel Roan. Album of the Year, hard to call that one. I've got a feeling maybe it'll be Beyonce because she's up for 11 awards, so they need to give her something.
Rolling Stone's the Rolling Stone magazine suggesting the Beatles might win a Grammy, which is quite funny, isn't it? For Now and Then, their recombobulated single.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely because it's not a very good song, really. I mean, it's a sketch of a John Lennon song. It wasn't really a Beatles song. And also it uses AI. I mean, I think the Grammys rulings on AI is still, it's definitely frowned upon. I mean, if they do, it would be, I think, for the publicity because everyone knows and loves the Beatles. But, I didn't like Now and Then. I thought it didn't really add to the legacy. So personally, I hope it doesn't win.
Now, we were talking just before about the Nile Rodgers, John Malkovich mashup that is Opus, which is sort of like, oh gosh, from the trailer, it looks rather like Midsummer. Have you seen it?
I have seen it. I have to say it's not very good. I mean, I'll just give you a personal level. It's okay. So it's about a guy, a rock star, reclusive rock star who forms a cult, and a young journalist wants to go and find him. Oh no! So it does go and find him and goes to visit his compound, and there all sort of mayhem ensues. Well,
it sounds like Lawrence from Felt.
Well, it's funny you should mention that.
I know.
Think, minus the millions, maybe. I mean, okay, just on a personal level, I'm a journalist. I interview rock stars for a living, and I did actually grow up in a cult. And this film is not like any of those things whatsoever.
Blimey,
it's quite fun.
We could go into this in depth, but I'm going to have to wrap it, Will. But we need to hear this another time, so promise to come back.
Time. Yeah, of course.
Will Hodgkinson, a pleasure to have you on The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Finally, on today's edition of The Globalist, it's Friday, so that can mean only one thing. It's time for Andrew Mueller to tell us what he's learned this week.
We learned this week that we are all doomed. We learned this, again and as usual, from the friendless nerds at the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, who, as they have annually since 1947, clambered free of the lockers into which they had last been stuffed by the football team, rearranged their most recent wedgies, pushed their sellotaped glasses back up their noses, stashed the pens back in the breast pockets of their short-sleeved shirts, and wheeled out their silly doomsday clock to sonorously caution us of impending apocalypse.
The world has not made sufficient progress on existential risks threatening all of humanity. We thus move the clock forward. In setting the clock closer to midnight, we send a stark signal.
Is it that girls still won't talk to you? We learned, anyway, that the lonely Poindexters believe that we are more doomed than ever.
It is now 89 seconds to midnight. This is the closest the world has ever been to midnight.
Happy New Year to you too, lads. You'll be right eventually. On which thought? We learned that recently reinstalled US President Donald Trump actually wasn't kidding when he nominated as his Secretary of State for Health Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or at least that Trump was willing to let the gag go as far as Senate confirmation hearings, where history's distant second most impressive Robert F. Kennedy would face the formidable obstacles of everything he has ever written, everything he has ever said, and everything he has ever done.
The receipts show that Mr. Kennedy has embraced conspiracy theories, quacks, charlatans, especially when it comes to the safety and efficacy of vaccines. He has made it his life's work to sow doubt and discourage parents from getting their kids life-saving vaccines. It has been lucrative for him and put him on the verge of immense power.
We learned, however, that the thinking of the raspy-throated whale-beheading bear corpse dumper has evolved on at least a few fronts. A bit. Possibly. Hard to tell.
Did you say Lyme disease is a highly likely militarily engineered bioweapon?
I probably did say that.
Did you say that?
And that's what the developer of Lyme
I want
disease
all of our
said.
colleagues to hear it, Mr. Kennedy. I want them to hear it. You said yes. Did you say that exposure to pesticides causes children to become transgender?
No, I never said that.
Okay, I have the record that I'll give to the chairman, and he can make his judgment about what you said.
For we learned that while the RFK-founded organisation Children's Health Defence sells infant onesies boasting of the unvaccinated status of the irresponsibly raised child swaddled therein,
your organisation is making money selling a child's product to parents for $26, which casts fundamental doubt on the usefulness of vaccines.
Can you guess?
All of my kids are vaccinated.
We should probably pace ourselves, though. There has to be at least another 3 months of material in RFK before Trump sacks him, derides him as a total wacko and loser, and pretends they never even met. And at any rate, we learned from elsewhere that there may actually be someone in this world less fit for public office, if possibly better dressed. Do we have some generic Portuguese music? For we learned what may have happened to our bags. Literally every goddamn time we've flown with a particular airline, our lawyers tell us we won't be mentioning by name. We learned that a member of Portugal's actual parliament, Miguel Arruda, of the far-right Chega party, had been accused of stealing luggage from airport baggage claim, then retailing the contents online, as an Agog nation was informed.
André Ventura diz que foi o Chega que denunciou a situação das maldas em que Miguel Arruda é erguido por furto.
O líder do partido pede que o deputado renuncie ao mandato.
We go now to our Portugal desk chief, Carlota Rebelo, for rigorously accurate translation and meticulously detailed context.
Yep, that's pretty much what they're saying.
Thanks, Carlota. That has expanded our understanding tremendously. Portuguese police investigating the case found 17 items of luggage in Arruda's home. If one of them is a battered antler rucksack in beige, orange tags on the zips, bit of a rip in one of the outer pockets, they can drop it round here whenever they're ready. We learned also, it should be noted, that Mr. Arruda denies everything, claiming that the widely enjoyed footage of him taking his pick from the carousels may have been generated by AI. And we, for one whimsical news review, earnestly wish him all the best with that defence. And we learned, possibly for the very first time in the history of Anglo-French relations, that the United Kingdom was prepared to make even the vaguest effort to avoid upsetting its neighbours across the Channel, thereby forestalling any eruptions of this kind of thing.
Non, vraiment, non, vraiment. Non.
We learned that the Royal Navy had decided on mature reflection not to name their latest astute-class submarine, HMS Agincourt, apparently for fear of stirring up unhappy memories of this ilk.
The game's afoot. Follow your spirit, and upon this charge, cry God for Harry, England, and St. George!
And yes, we know that's from Henry V before the Siege of Harfleur, not the Battle of Agincourt. Don't write in. The clip just fit better than any excerpts from the St. Crispin's Day speech. Shut up. We learned anyway that the boat in question will instead be called HMS Achilles, from which we learn that clearly the Royal Navy isn't too worried about offending any Trojans, and also that they're remarkably insouciant about naming a submarine of all craft after someone best recalled for having a small fatal weakness via which they could be rendered inoperable by a puncture. We therefore learned mostly, and frankly much to our disappointment, of the betrayal of a centuries-old and mutually treasured tradition of cross-channel baiting and bickering, though we, for one humorous current affairs monologue, believe that it is not too late for amends to be made, and note that there is plenty of room along the side of a submarine, for HMS Napoleon died a broken man in a British prison. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Mueller.
Thanks to Andrew. That's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Hassan Anderson, Tom Webb and Anita Riotta, our researcher, Maisie Ringer, and our studio manager, Elliot Greenfield. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The Briefing is live at midday in London, and The Globalist returns at the same time on Monday. I'm Guy Delaunay. Thanks very much for tuning in.